Okay, guys, so I think we'll get started. Thank you all for coming. It's my pleasure to introduce Jason Marden. He's a professor at UC Santa Barbara who works on game theory and control. Of course, he's won numerous awards, including the Ekman, which is one of the bigger awards in control theory, and NSF Career, multiple yips, things like that. And today we're going to have the pleasure of hearing him talk about the value of information in games.
All right, well, thank you everyone for attending. It's really a high room, so I'll try and make this interesting. So thank you so much, Lillian, for inviting me to partake and for being here today. So what this talk really is about, it's about work that I've been doing in the past couple of years, basically trying to think about what does information mean, what is the value of information, in this idea of multi-agent systems. So the title of the talk, if agents could talk, what would they say? And we're hoping to tease out some of the answers to these questions, and what I'm hoping to convince you at least throughout is that we can tease out answers to these questions. The answers are hard, but hopefully there's a lot more work to be done. So this is joint work with my student, David Grimsman. We had a visitor, Shabir Ali, current postdoc of mine, which is Dario Pakanan, a previous postdoc, Vinod, and Joao Hispania. Alrighty, so I could put a picture right here of a variety of different multi-agent systems, from UAVs to you name it. I instead chose to go with the Pac-Man picture here. And what I want you guys to do is think about yourselves from a system design perspective, where you're not thinking about being Pac-Man, rather you're thinking about designing the strategy for the ghost. Okay? So your job is to derive the control strategies for the individual ghost, and your objective is to capture Pac-Man in the least amount of time. Okay, so that's the hat that I want you guys wearing today. And if we think about what our central objective is, whether it's in Pac-Man or any other multi-agent system of interest, it's really what we're after. We're after the design of admissible control algorithms that attain near optimal behavior in a reasonable period of time. So in this particular case, you would like to design some form of admissible algorithm for the ghost, right, such as that you basically capture Pac-Man in the least amount of time possible. Okay, so here I've highlighted 3 words, from admissible to near optimal to reasonable. So let's go through each one of those to highlight what those mean. So in this case, in admissible is kind of the groundworks at which you're thinking about designing this underlying algorithm. Okay, so here am I thinking about some form of a centralized path-making policy? Am I requiring distributed, where the ghosts make decisions individually in response to the information that they had? You know, kind of what information do they have and all. So admissible has to work in the confines of what we're operating within. Okay? So when we move on to near optimal, what do I mean by this? Is one would like to attain performance that's comparable to, in some sense, the best all-knowing centralized algorithm. Okay? So what does this mean is we have some form of control algorithm that's in our admissible world. W of that somehow measures the performance of that. We would like that performance to be relatively close to the performance of this best all-knowing algorithm that we have. And we're going to measure that performance maybe by this ratio. The closer it is to 1, the better we are. Okay? So that's near optimal. When we talk about reasonable period of time, this means we'd like something that scales nicely in the size of the system. So maybe linear layer and polynomial in the dimensions of the system. All right. So if we think about these two, kind of the relationship between near optimal and a reasonable period of time and time complexity, well, this is well understood in the field of optimization and computer science. This has been studied for a variety of, for a long period of time. However, when we start bringing admissible into the realm, and especially what admissible means in the context of multi-agent systems, this starts complicating things dramatically. And so what we'll try and do is trying to understand, what does admissible mean? What does it cause in terms of this underlying relationship between optimality and time period? And specifically, what we want to try and tease out is the role of information within. In particular, how does informational availability, right, impact the achievable performance guarantees? Okay? That sounds fairly broad. Let's think about this in the context of Pac-Man. We can start asking the question, is imagine that we're thinking about designing a control algorithm where the individual ghost make decisions in response to the information they have available to them. So here we could ask ourselves, well, what type of information does, let's say, Clyde have, which is the orange ghost? And we could say, well, does he know what the other ghosts are doing? Right? That's one level of information. We could ask, well, does he currently know Pac-Man's location? That could be another piece of information. How much information does he have about his board? That could be another one. For example, where are the current dots at? Can that give me indications of where Pac-Man's going next and so forth? But this is all the level of information. If he has everything, then he has complete information. Maybe he has only a subset of this. So when we talk about how does informational availability impact, the first question is, what information does Clyde have access to? And then a difficult question as well is, if he has access to this information, what the heck should he do with it, right? And so what we'll understand, or what we'll tease out of this, is that even the second question is difficult, right? Given information, what should he do with it? It's not always straightforward, okay? So once again, the overarching thing that we're thinking about is, once again, how does information availability impact things? And really that's addressing these two questions of what information does he have, do our agents have, and what do they do with it? We need to be able to answer both those questions, okay? So the first part of this talk is going to deal with some form of when we start stripping knowledge away, or where agents have limited knowledge. And here we're going to assume that in the context of Pac-Man that they know the entire board, but they have limitations with regard to the choices of others. So they might not be aware of the path choices of other ones. And we want to understand is, when agents don't have that knowledge, once again, what can we do? What can we achieve? Are there things that are theoretically impossible to guarantee? And then in the second part of this talk, we'll start going more to a world where we'll move away from this idea of stripping knowledge away regarding the choices of other agents, and we'll think about what about if they have some form of spatially available information. Okay, so for example, we could imagine, Pac-Man or Ghost are allocated about, and in general, they have some understanding of what's happening in their region, but they don't necessarily know what's happening outside of their region. So what type of informational restrictions in this world, what does that mean? All right, so that's kind of the two parts of the talk. If there's any questions, just yell them out throughout. I'm happy to take it, and we'll have a discussion in the process as well. Okay, so once again, our central goal is the following. It's design admissible control algorithms that attain near optimal behavior in a reasonable period of time. So like I said, that computer science and optimization has focused on these two for a while. One of their success stories centers on the idea of submodularity. Okay? So what are submodules? So submodularity is a class of underlying optimization problems that's very relevant to engineering. And what it does is it has this property of diminishing returns. Intuitively, what does this mean? Is as I add more sensors to my system, my performance increases, but the rate of increase goes down. So going from 1 sensor to 2 sensors helps out dramatically. Going from 1 million sensors to 1,000,001 helps out, but not nearly as much. Okay, so submodular functions are functions that have this underlying property that more is better, but the rate at which it's better goes down as my set gets larger. So there's one of the success stories, and here's one of the success stories is when we take submodularity and when we take submodular optimization problems and we combine it with some form of a simple algorithm, such as the greedy algorithm, and I'll define what these exactly mean on the slides to come, it means that we can get some form of a solution which is within 50% of optimality. So once again, we have a broad class of optimization problems that is relevant to engineering. We have some simple dynamics, and we can achieve something that's fairly good with regard to performance. Now, it's true we can do better than this 1/2, but at a first glance, it's like relevant class, simple dynamics that converge somewhere quickly, and guess what? We can get somewhere, we can get to a performance which is reasonably close to optimal. Okay? So once again, let's start trying to tease out the answer to this question as well. How does informational availability impact performance guarantees in this? Okay. So before we can start really trying to address that question, let's make sure we're all on the same page with what does a submodularity mean and what does the greedy algorithm look like, and then we'll start stripping away these types of information. All right, so submodularity. So there's two principal features of a submodular optimization problem is we have some ground set of elements, E. So we could think about that as being sensor locations in some form of emission space. We could think about it more generally as well. And we have some welfare function that maps that takes in subsets of E and returns some form of a real number, which we can call the score or the performance associated with that. So we're going to make 3 underlying assumptions of what this welfare function or objective function looks like. So the first, it's going to be normalized. The second one is that it's going to be monotone, and this is just getting at the idea, if we allocate more sensors, our performance goes up. Okay? And the last one's going to bring in this notion of submodularity, which is the key definition of submodularity. And basically what it says is it says the following. If we take one element x and we add it to two different sets, a smaller set and a bigger set. So here the smaller set is A, the bigger set is B. It basically says the gain and improvement by adding it to A is bigger than the gain and improvement to our objective of adding it into B. Okay? So adding an element to a smaller set gives us more return on the investment than adding it to a larger set. Okay? And that's this idea of this diminishing returns. Okay? And so here, when we talk about submodular functions, we're implicitly going to assume that it's normalized, that it's monotone, and that it's submodular. So we'll lump all that into our submodular definition. All right, so this is the current setup that we have, is we have elements, and we have a submodular function, once again, which maps the power set of elements to real numbers. And this is our scoring function. This is what we're interested in. So we talked about a multi-agent setting. So what's our multi-agent setup? What do we have is we have a set of agents. Our set of agents is indexed 1 through n. Each agent can select some subset of choices. So each agent is going to, their decision variable will be little xi. It's going to be within, this doesn't really work, but it's going to be within the set capital Xi, and that's just going to be in the power set of elements, right? So they're going to be able to choose some subset of elements at their disposal. And how are we going to evaluate some form of a collective choice? So we'll think about a collective choice being a tuple, where each individual agent is associated with one of their feasible choices xi. And we're going to evaluate the worth of a tuple just by doing the union of all the elements and evaluating that according to our submodular function. Okay? So that's going to be, in some sense, how we evaluate the worth of an underlying tuple of choices. All right, so for example, in the context of coverage over there, we could think about the agents being the set of sensors, the choices being, in some sense, their local coverage area, what regions am I covering, and the evaluation is some metric of joint coverage quality. Right, I'm not going to write down any math on this point, but we could imagine that we could write something down. All right. Okay, so that's submodularity. So when we talk about our setup for submodularity, here's our principal elements. We have our elements, we have our agents, we have their choice sets, right? And we have this submodular function that's governing the show. Okay, so that's our underlying setup. That's the underlying optimization problem that we have at hand. Now we can ask ourselves, well, we talked about this greedy algorithm. What's the greedy algorithm? Well, the greedy algorithm is some form of process at which agents select their individual choices. And it's a highly simple process. And so basically, how this process goes is as follows. The agents line up from 1 to n. And basically, agents with smaller indices go first. And when an agent goes, so agent 1 will go first, and what he'll do is he'll try and maximize his marginal contribution to the objective given the people that went before him. Okay? So in that particular case, once again, everybody lines up outside of the room. People enter one at a time. They observe the choices that happened before them, and then they make a greedy decision trying to maximize the global objective given the knowledge that they have access to, which is the people that went before them. Okay? So once again, agents make selections in according to predefined order. They're aware of the decisions made by everybody before them, and then they follow this simple protocol of trying to optimize the global objective W as a basis for how to make their decision. Right? Here's a simple illustration of what this looks like, just to make sure that we're all clear on this. Here we have a simple weighted set covering problem where the global objective or the goal is what we want to do is we want to allocate agent 1 and agent 2 to these boxes in some sense to maximize the sum of the covered boxes. So here agent 1 can choose either the left box or the middle box. Agent 2 can choose either the middle or the right. And the 9, the 10, and the 1 indicate the relative value of these boxes or elements. Okay? So according to the greedy algorithm, agent 1 goes first. Okay? So at this point, he's not aware of anything else that's happened in the system. So he looks at it when he enters the system, when he walks in that door, he's the only one there. He has these two choices, left or middle. He says, well, what is the relative worth of that according to the global objective? Well, if I choose left, I'm going to increase the global objective from 0 to 9. If I choose middle, I'm going to increase the global objective from 0 to 10. So left is going to be associated with a score of 9. Middle is going to be associated with a score of 10. So he's going to choose middle, which is going to take him in the middle box. Okay? Now that he's made his choice, ghost number 2 walks in the room, and he says, well, his 2 choices are middle or right, and he observes the ghost that went in front of him. So he observes the choice of agent 1, which is at middle. So now he evaluates his decision. He says, well, if I choose middle, that box is already covered. So if I go there, I'm not going to add anything more to the underlying objective, so the score associated with middle is going to be 0. If I go to right, no one's covering there, so the marginal contribution to that will be 1. So here, according to this protocol, the best choice would be to choose right. And so what do we see here? That the greedy algorithm is going to give us this particular allocation, which is a score of 11. Optimal is actually fairly easy. It's 19 in this particular case. And what do we see is we see that the emergent, or the quality of the greedy solution over the best centralized is 11 over 19, which is greater than or equal to that 1/2 guarantee that we saw before. Right? So this was just a simple illustration. Now this 1/2 is going to hold in far more complicated situations. So in this covering example, one could have arbitrary number of boxes, arbitrary valuations, arbitrary action sets, and it can extend to more general types of objective functions rather than just is it covered or is it not. Okay, so that's kind of what the greedy does. Once again, recap, agents are in line, they go one by one, they observe all the decisions in front of them, and then they greedily optimize the objective, or their marginal contribution to the objective. All right, so let's start to probe some questions about information in this context, and the first question that we would like to ask is the following. So what happens if all agents do not have access to the information in front of them? So imagine that I'm agent 5, I walk in the underlying door, I'm supposed to condition my choices on the behavior of agents 1 through 4. What if I do not have access to all that information? Okay? What if, for example, agent 3 I'm unaware of? Okay. So here what we want to do is at least introduce a model of what information do agents have, and so here we'll think about this through an underlying graph. So our nodes are going to be our agents, and we're going to draw an edge from agent J to agent I, or from node J to node I, if J is aware of the choice of agent I. Okay, so once again, if I have an arrow pointing from me to Lillian, it means I am aware of Lillian's choice. If she has an arrow pointing to me, she's aware of my choice. Okay, so for example, according to the greedy algorithm, we have a graph that looks like this. Agent 1 has knowledge of no choice. Agent 2 is aware of the choice of agent 1. Agent 3 is aware of the choice of agent 2 and agent 3. And once again, these can be seen by the outgoing edges from each one of these nodes. And we'll call this the information graph associated with the standard. And what we want to start to understand is if we start stripping away edges from this graph, what does this do to the quality of the emergent behavior according to the greedy algorithm? So if we go from the greedy to some form of a localized greedy, what can we say about that? Okay, so for example, if this edge is missing, how does our greedy algorithm persist, or how does it go? So agent 1 greedily tries to optimize their objective when they have no information. So here they just pick the choice that's best given that no one else is there. Agent 2 sees the choice of agent 1, so he performs the following computation to see where he should go. Agent 3, once again, sees the choice of agent 1 and 2, so he tries to optimize his marginal contribution. Now all of a sudden, here's where things change, is agent 4 generally would base his decision on agent 1, but he no longer has access to that. So here, what we're going to think is that now what he's going to do is, well, he's aware of the choices of agent 2 and agent 3, so he's going to maximize his marginal contribution subject to the information at hand. Okay, and we want to understand what happens. Mainly, how does the structure of this graph impact the emergent, or the quality of the emergent solution associated with our localized greedy algorithm? All right, so here's the first theorem that I want to present, which captures this. So it says the following. It says, consider any submodular multi-agent optimization problem with some form of an information graph. And what it says is the quality of this localized greedy solution, right, can be lower bounded by this quantity, which is 1 over 1 plus alpha star of G. And alpha star of G is known as something called the fractional independence number of the graph G. So right now, just think about this. We can take the graph, we can identify some form of properties of the graph, and those properties naturally translate to our underlying performance guarantees. Okay? We'll go through and highlight exactly what this fractional independence number is. But right now, information graph directly translates to performance guarantees associated with this localized greedy. Okay? Now, furthermore, so here I have this as just a lower bound. The question is whether or not this is tight or not. In fact, it is pretty tight. So it's essentially tight, meaning that one can't put an improved bound to this. Meaning I can't actually say that it's actually strictly greater than this, because for many cases it'll actually hit this bound. Okay? So this is effectively all that one can guarantee associated with this greedy algorithm subject to some form of a graph G. Okay. So let's parse what this fractional independence number is. So first of all, just as a little bit of a reminder, what's an independent set? So if we have a graph G, an independent set is just a set of vertices such that there's no edges going between them. Okay? So that's an independent set. Well, so we'll say two nodes are in an independent set G if there's not an edge going from I to J or from J to I. Okay? So the independence number is just the cardinality of the largest independent set, so the biggest independent set that there is. And so, for example, when we deal with our information graph associated with our full click, which was our greedy algorithm, our informational dependence on our greedy, here the independence number is 1. Okay? If we start restricting things and we start considering alternative graphs, we can start calculating variations of this. So in this case, the independence number is 2. Okay? So I brought in this idea that it relies on this notion of a fractional independence number. Well, so where does that come from? It says, well, basically the independence number, calculating the independence number is non-trivial, and it can be cast as an integer programming problem. And so here, what fractional independence numbers just said, we're going to look at that same, but we're going to relax it. Right? Rather than requiring it to be restricted to integers, we're going to allow renumber relaxation, and this will give us our fractional independence number. So it's solving the same integer problem, but we're just going to relax it from integers to real numbers. And this could give us different answers. So in this case, if we were to find out what is the fractional independence number of the full, it's still 1. However, in this lower case, this number could be a little bit larger than the actual independence number. Okay. So once again, here's our underlying theorem. Let's see some graphs of what does this mean. It says, okay, well, when we have the full click, this matches our previous result that we get our 1/2. Why? The independence number is 1, so we get 1 over 2. So here's when things start to get interesting. If we remove one edge in this graph, meaning we remove the edge from node 3 to node 2, all of a sudden our performance degrades. It goes from 1/2 all the way to 1/3. Okay? So just by stripping away one piece of information, we degrade our performance from 1/2 all the way to 1/3. Okay? Interestingly, even if we kill all the other edges that exist between 2 and 3, so imagine that you just draw a line, and any information that was circulating from the bottom group or from the top group of agents down to the bottom group, we just eliminated that all, we still get the 1/3. So really, once you cut some degree of information flow, it's almost as in some sense equivalent to cutting all information flow. Okay? That these extra links didn't help you at all. Okay? And here's one other form of a graph, so if we cut information, now all of a sudden things go down to 1/4. Okay? So once again, the idea here is, what do we have? We have a degree of fragility. Cutting one link can cause performance to get significantly worse. But then if we cut the right links, it doesn't hurt that much anymore. But when we start creating these dislocated pockets, that's when life gets bad. Okay? So here's just some illustration of what the theorem says. All right. Okay. So that was kind of like the first style of result, is trying to think about information. Once again, bootstrapping off all this, just the greedy algorithm, trying to understand if we remove this underlying informational dependence, what does that cost us in terms of performance? All right, so let's keep building upon this, and let's start trying to ask ourselves more questions off this simple model to really just start getting more intuition for really the role that information plays in attaining high-quality solutions in these multi-agent architectures. So the second question that we can start thinking about is, well, could we potentially capitalize off strategic information exchange? Okay, and here's the picture that I want in our mind for doing this. So what do we have over here? We have agent 1, 2, and 3 are kind of form some degree of a clique in the standpoint that everybody sees everybody that went before them. And now I have this arrow that points from agent 4 to agent 3, and it's a green arrow to highlight something different is going on. Okay? So what do we have over here? We want to think about a green arrow representing some form of a limited bandwidth or a constrained communication channel. Okay? So in general, if we were trying to perform the greedy algorithm, agent 4 would want access to x1, x2, and x3. Right? He'd want access to all the amount of decisions. Right? But that could potentially be costly. So the question is, well, what if there could only be one piece of information that's transmitted from 3 to 4? So he's talking to 3. He's all, hey, 3, give me some information. But 3 can only say one thing. He can either say x1, x2, or x3, and he can be strategic about what information that he shares. So for example, if we had an arrow pointing from 4 to 3, according to our greedy algorithm, this would mean that, well, agent 4 has access to the information, has access to the choice of agent 3. Now we're saying something's more subtle in the fact that, well, we're now giving agent 3 the ability to state, well, what information am I going to tell agent 4? And what we'd like to know is whether or not we can think about, well, what should he send? And what should agent 4 do with it to try and think about, to try and improve the quality? Could we help mitigate the losses by strategically being smart about what we choose to send? So once again, the dominant questions here are, well, what information should agent 3 transmit to agent 4? I can't tell you everything. I can maybe tell you something. How should I prioritize what I send? And then the second question is, well, now that he presented some knowledge to agent 3, what should agent 4 do with it? All right. So we have some limited results in this context, and here's the style of results that we're doing is, well, what we're going to have is we're going to have a series of m disconnected clicks. So in each one of these, I've gone from circles to blurbs, right, to little ovals, to highlight that each one of these ovals is going to be some form of a disconnected click. What do I mean by that? I mean, each one of these is going to look like our click. Right, the click that we studied before, but they're only going to be loosely connected between the two of them where we have this strategic information exchange component, meaning that after this click makes a decision, we see that this green arrow is pointing to 5. The last member who is able to observe all the choices of everyone in that group has to decide one piece of information to ship downstream. Okay, just one. Can't send everything, but can only send one. Okay, so here's the setting that we have. We have m disconnected clicks, and each one of these clicks are of size. The size of click 1 is of omega 1. The size of click 2 is omega 2. The size of click 3 is omega 3. And the size of click 4 is omega 4. And once again, it's this strategic information exchange between the two of them, meaning that agent 1 is letting everybody know downstream only one piece of the decision that's been taken by a member of its group. Okay? Well, it says, okay, here's a theorem that we could state in this realm as well. Consider this world. Once again, we have these disconnected clicks. Now what are we thinking about? There's these two questions, right? Is what information am I sending? So I need some form of protocol for highlighting the last member of each click. Here's the information that I'm broadcasting downstream. And I also need kind of a protocol that says, well, the future, when I receive this information, what do I do with it? And so I'm not going to specify the exact form of what we're sending or how we're utilizing it, but there's some optimal way to do it. And so what I'm telling you here is the performance guarantees associated with the optimal way of doing it. Okay? And basically it says, well, the performance of this strategic localized greedy over the performance of the optimal, I can bound this by this alternative expression here, which is going to be strictly greater than 1 over m plus 1, where 1 over m plus 1 would be what would exist if there were no strategic edges between them at all. So if we just had these disconnected clicks, the previous theorem tells us that the performance would be 1 over m plus 1. Now we're doing strictly better than 1 over m plus 1. And here, how close we're doing it factors into, in some sense, the size of these clicks and so forth. Okay? And once again, furthermore, the bound is essentially tight, meaning that it's impossible to guarantee that we're going to do any better than this. Okay? All right, once again, pictures. Let's just see what this means. Here was our previous example. What do we have? We have two disconnected clicks. 1, 2, and 3 is group 1. Agent 4 is group 2 in isolation by themselves. And now we have this strategic edge between the two clicks, right? If we had no edge whatsoever, our previous theorem tells us that we're 1/3. if we now, let's say we didn't be strategic and we just introduced a fixed edge pointing from the last edge to somebody in the side, so we had a non-strategic information exchange, meaning that agent 4 is going to be aware of the choice of agent 2. We still have 1/3, so there's no underlying improvement. However, by adding the strategic edge, is we can bump things now up to 1/3 minus 1/3. So we can get a little bit bang for the buck just by being smart about how we broadcast or which information we relay downstream, rather than just making some pre-commitment to that. Okay. All right. And so the interesting thing about this is this theorem that we put on the previous slide kind of characterizes precisely what one can gain through strategic information exchange, meaning that we can't do any better than this. But we can guarantee this, right? This is the added benefit. In some sense, the difference between these two quantities on the right tells us how much a strategic edge is helping us, right? How much can being smart about the information that we choose to tell one another, how much that impacts and improves performance. Okay. All right. So the last question I want to talk about in this context is, well, so we've kind of bootstrapped ourselves into thinking about this way of making decisions, meaning that agents should greedily optimize the global objective, which is this function right here, or marginal contribution. Those two are equivalent, right? Well, you know, this was the greedy algorithm. It seems like it should be the naive and a right choice. Is it actually the right choice, right? So what we want to do is, well, could we substitute, put something else in there that would give us better performance at the back end? Right? That's what we'd like to address, right? There's no reason that we need to be married to this way of decision making. Okay? So the first result is the following. It says, well, if we look at acyclic information graphs, meaning that really information is only flowing in one direction, which is the case of the greedy algorithm. So once again, agent 2 is aware of agent 1, agent 3 is aware of agent 2 and agent 1, agent 4 is aware in this case of agent 3 and agent 2. So there's no cycles anywhere, right? Then it turns out that the greedy selection process, meaning agents optimizing the global objective or optimizing their marginal contribution, is the right thing to do. So acyclic, the answer is affirmative, that this is the right thing to do. And in some sense, notice that the term on the right, when we say maximize our marginal contribution, the term on the right doesn't have xi in it at all. So really effectively that this maximizing marginal contribution is equivalent to maximizing our system level objective given the information at hand, right? So maximizing marginal contribution, maximizing the system level objective are virtually the same. The question now is, well, what happens if we have some form of cyclic dependencies? So what did I do here? I drew an arrow from agent 1 to 4, meaning that agent 1 is now going to be aware of the choice of agent 4. Okay? So let's think about what happens here in a greedy algorithm. As agent 1 goes, makes his choice. Agent 2 observes the choice of agent 1, he makes his choice. Agent 3 observes the choice of agent 1 and 2, he now makes his choice. Agent 4 sees agent 2 and agent 3 and makes his choice. Okay? But now agent 1 observes the choice of agent 4, so he might want to revise his choice, because now we have some dependencies. So he might want to revise his choice and do something different. Well, when he does something different, now agent 2 might want to do something different. Agent 3 might want to do something different. Agent 4 might want to do something different. Well, now that agent 4 has wanted to do something different, now agent 1 might want to do something different. So you have this cyclic style dependencies, right? And that causes problems. That causes challenges. We'll talk in some sense a little bit of how to deal with it. But think about going from just a greedy algorithm where we go through the order once to just some round robin where we just keep going through. And our hope is that behavior would settle down somewhere. Okay? So the question is, well, is greedy the right thing to do there? And the answer is unequivocally no. Right? So this choice of here of agents, optimizing the global objective, right, subject to the information that they have hand, is no longer the right thing to do. Rather, there's something better to be doing. So once again, I just want to emphasize this. Agents optimizing, when it's an agent's turn to optimize, he has access to some level of information. Him using that information and using the global objective as the basis for his decision is the wrong thing to do. Meaning that we can do alternative things and get much better performance guarantees. Okay? In fact, we can get performance guarantees that are better than 30% by substituting in this box and replacing it with something else. So what seems like the right decision actually can cause significant harm. All right. And so here what I want to do is, so now we're going to pivot to the second part of the talk. If there's any questions, I'm happy to address them here, or we'll start, nothing. Okay. All right. So that was the first part of the talk, is we really focused on the greedy, and we started trying to tease out this questions of if agents have limited knowledge of the choices of others, how much does that hurt us? And then we started asking as well, could we be strategic in the sharing? What information is shared between the agents to help mitigate that? Okay? The second part of this talk is now going to be thinking about, once again, this spatially available information. So what do we have is these ghosts, or agents, are aware of information that's happening around them locally. And so, for example, I might be aware of the decision, the Clyde, the orange ghost, might be aware of what the blue ghost is doing in that region, but he's not aware of anything else, right? So these regions tell us something. All right. So to get our feet wet in at least thinking about this idea, so here, once again, everyone has knowledge about everyone. So we're thinking about potentially these cyclic dependencies. We want to ask ourselves as well, what's the right thing to do in this context? So what I want to do is we'll bring in a simple model at first. We'll answer this simple model, and we'll answer it pretty detailed, and then we'll highlight some extensions, but really all that I care about you guys getting is basically the story to this simpler model. So our model is going to be kind of like that simple example that we had before. It's just going to be a weighted set covering problem, where we have a set of resources. Our resources are the underlined boxes. Each box has an underlying value, which is the number within the box, which indicates its relative worth. The actions of the individual agents are kind of the various different subsets of the boxes that they could cover. And our global welfare is what we're capturing as well, given a particular covering choice of everyone. So here X is a tuple, which includes a covering decision for each of the entities, X1, X2, all the way up to Xn. It's just basically saying what's the sum of the value of the covered boxes. Okay? So for example, when we talk about possible action sets, Clyde here he might be able to cover the 3 boxes on the left or the 2 boxes on the right. And here, when we think about what their choices are, we don't require that they can only cover 1 box, or that the choice set all includes, just covering, sets of boxes of a certain size. It can be arbitrary. So here, in this example, Clyde can choose to cover either the left or the right. Here, the blue ghost can either choose to cover that subset or this subset. Okay? How do I evaluate, once again, just to make sure we're on the same page, how do we evaluate the global welfare? Well, it's just once they've all made particular choices, which are highlighted here, we go through each of the individual boxes. If the box is covered, we get that form of a value. If it's not covered, we don't. So here, given this assignment, what do we get? We get 1 plus 2 plus 8 plus 3 plus 1 plus 7, which hopefully, if I did my arithmetic right, adds up to 22. Right? The key here is, though, that even though 2 agents are covering the box on the bottom left, which is 2, we don't double count it. It's either covered or it's not covered. Whether there's 1 agent covering it, 2 agents, 3 agents, 5 agents, or 10 agents, it doesn't matter. We only count it once. Okay. All right. So let's start thinking about solutions to this underlying optimization. What do we want to do is we want to derive some form of an assignment, a covering assignment, meaning a covering a choice for each agent, such that collectively we optimize this objective. We want to maximize the total value of the covered elements. All right. How are we going to evaluate it? We're going to evaluate this using the same underlying metric that we did before, this competitive ratio, is we'd like the quality of our solution to be close to the quality of our the optimal allocation. Okay? And here what we want to do is we want to think about a range. Like, what can we do in a fully centralized world, but if we require a distributed architecture, what can we do in that world as well? So here, this problem is known to be hard. Okay? It's NP hard. And so what does that mean is we're forced, even in a centralized world, to start thinking about approximations. Okay? Meaning, what can we do in polynomial time? And so, mind you, what does a centralized world mean? It's we're going to feed to a computer the entire problem specification, meaning the set of resources, their underlying values, the structure of the action sets, and then we want this computer is going to have access to everything is now going to spit out an answer. And we'd like to know how good of an answer can it spit out. And it turns out that the best that we can hope for in polynomial time is that the quality of this solution is basically within 63% of optimal. Okay? Remember, the greedy algorithm only gave us 1/2. It gave us something that was 50% of optimal. What this says is that we can do a little bit more work and push that up all the way to 63%. All right. Okay. So that's fully centralized, meaning that one central entity is aware of everything and can make a collective choice, right? And if that is true, we can get 63%. Right? The question is, well, what if we want to have a distributed architecture where somehow the choice sets or the choices of all these different agents are being made locally in an independent fashion? Okay. So in that case, what does a solution even look like? When we talked about the greedy algorithm, we talked about an algorithm, and we specified, okay, agent 1 does this, agent 2 does this, and so forth. When a round robin came into bear, we kind of faked it a little bit and shook our hands and argued that a solution was somehow some form of solution to a round robin that eventually it would converge somewhere. Where does it converge? So we want to be a little bit more rigorous about here. Well, what do we mean by solution in a situation where individual agents are making their own independent choices in response to the information that they have had? Okay. So here's our solution concept that we're going to use is we're going to think about something being in equilibrium to some form of a designed utility or target function. Okay? And here's our model of how we're going to think about that, and we'll go through some various examples of what this means. So what we're going to assume is we're going to assume the following, that to parse this notation, we're going to say that the utility of agent I for his covering choice xi, given the covering choices of everyone else, so here we're denoting the coloring choices of everyone not equal to I, as x minus I, so that's the coloring choice of everybody else, right, is going to be the following. We're going to sum over all the resources that agent selects, so he's going to look over all possible ones. Each one of those resources has valuation VR, and he's going to get some fraction of that value depending upon how many agents are there. Okay? So once again, I'm going to go through each one of I'm covering 3 different resources. I'm going to look at each one. They all have their own valuation. And I'm going to get something that's summable over there, but I'm going to discount the valuation that I get as some function of the number of agents that are there. Okay? And this discounting factor is going to be expressed by this function right here, f, which in some sense maps the natural numbers to real numbers, just says how am I choosing to discount this depending upon the amount of people that are already there. Okay? So once again, let's just go through an example if we build off this. So what's the orange ghost? How does he evaluate his utility for that particular covering assignment, given the covering assignment of everyone else? Well, he's going to get 1 for the top left times f of 1. Why? He's the only one covering that, so there's just one agent covering that. He's going to get 2 times f of 2. Why is he getting f of 2? Well, the box on the bottom left that has valuation 2 is being covered by 2 individuals, so we're going to discount that times f of 2. Right? And he's going to get 3 times f of 1 is going to be the last one. Why? He's covering that box by himself. Okay? Likewise, if we followed this for the blue ghost, what do we have over here? He's going to get 2 times f of 2, because once again, the bottom left one that he's covering is also being covered by somebody else, plus 8 times f of 1. Okay? So for example, if you always set f to always be equal to 1, you would do no discounting whatsoever. I get that value whether everybody's there or whether nobody's there. F now gives us the ability to discount something, to weigh something as well. If somebody's already there, how should I weigh that in my calculation of what I want to do? Okay. So this is the design component. So the question is, well, what should F be? Right? What we'd like to do is design F to, in some sense, to optimize the quality of our solutions. We've now introduced this. We can start talking about, well, what does that mean? Okay. So here's our setup. Once again, this is just everything that we had before. We have our resources, we have our valuations, we have our action sets, and we have our welfare. And now here came in our design elements. What do we have? We have utility functions of this form, and we have our defined decision rule, which is just this function of how we're discounting things. Okay? And notice that when we introduce these 2 elements, we define an underlying game. This results in a game. Right? All that we have is games are comprised of 3 elements. Actions players, actions, and utilities. And once we define our division rule, that takes care of those definitions for us. Okay? Notice, though, that this division rule actually does something more. When we specify an f, when I specify a way to how do you discount things, well, what do we have is that regardless of how these top choices are made, it results in a well-defined game for anything. Right? So in fact, is what we can think about this f doing is it induces a family of games, not just one. So if I pick f, and Marden picks resources, values, actions, and so forth, my f defines the utility function so that we have a game. So think about this set of games, script g of f, being all games that can be formed when we restrict our attention to f, and Marden is allowed to pick anything that he wants for those components up there. So that's our, all right. So we talked about solution. What's our solution concept? Is we're going to be worried about just Nash equilibrium, which is somehow an individually agreeable point, which when we talked about our round-robin greedy algorithm, this effectively would be a rest point of that round-robin greedy. It just means that if everybody else is doing their part of the Nash equilibrium, I'm best off doing my part of the Nash equilibrium. Okay? So somehow we're individually agreeable. And our goal is, in some sense, to design an f to optimize the efficiency of the resulting Nash equilibrium. Okay? And when we think about optimizing the efficiency, we're not going to be worried about doing it over just a single game, because we can imagine that typically maybe a system operator wouldn't know the precise landscape of the land, right? He's not going to know exactly the structure of everything. We're going to be thinking about doing it from the set of games g of f, meaning that I would like to optimize f, pick the best possible f, such that regardless of what Marden does, right, I'm still guaranteed some form of good performance. Okay? How are we going to characterize that? We're going to characterize this through a couple different kind of efficiency measures, known as the price of anarchy and the price of stability. Okay? So the price of anarchy is the following. It's some form of a pessimistic analysis. And basically what it says is the following. So it says that when I pick f, Marden's going to pick the worst case realization of these parameters to make it so that a Nash equilibrium is as bad as humanly possible. Okay? So in some sense, what is price of anarchy? It's just doing a worst case analysis over all games and another worst case analysis over all equilibrium in some games. So if I'm able to calculate some expression for this, what it means that regardless of what parameters are chosen, that I can guarantee that all equilibrium will have a quality above some number. Okay? And this is a very pessimistic analysis. Okay? A more optimistic one is this idea of price of stability. It says, okay, we're still going to do a worst case over all possible parameters, so all possible games. But rather than look at the worst in equilibrium game, we're going to look at the best equilibrium in each game. Okay? And so once again, just maybe I have dynamics that can get me to the good equilibrium, or maybe I'm just being optimistic in that I'm not going to fall victim to the bad equilibrium. Okay? And so due to the fact that Nash equilibrium are often not unique, is these terms can be often different. Okay. So once again, our goal is really to think about defining this division rule to optimize the efficiency of the resulting equilibrium. Let's run through some simple design choices. So one is we could say, okay, let's just share things equally. Okay, so this is known as the Shapley value. It says, okay, f of 1 equals 1, f of 2 equals 1/2, f of 3 equals 1/3. So for example, how do they share that box 2? Well, each one, if we're using this form of a division rule, each one's going to get 1 out of it. Okay? And it turns out that this gives us a price of anarchy of 1/2. Okay? We could do something also known as marginal contribution, which basically says is, well, you're going to get the whole value if you're there alone. You're going to get 0 otherwise. Okay? So in this particular case, the particular f would look as f1 would be 1, f2 would be 0, and f3 would be 0, meaning that we don't want multiple agents covering the same spot, so I'm going to penalize you for doing it. Nobody gets anything. Okay? Well, what will this will guarantee a price of anarchy of 1/2. So same as the Shapley value, equal share, marginal contribution do the same thing. Here, I just want to belabor on this, is marginal contribution, as we stated earlier, is equivalent to agents optimizing the global objective. So if you're optimizing marginal contribution, it's equivalent to optimizing global objective. The key thing that I'm going to emphasize is that this is not an optimal strategy, meaning that there's other division rules that can do better. So stated differently, optimizing marginal contribution is equivalent to optimizing, if agents were optimizing the global objective, that's going to give us a price of anarchy of 1/2. We can do better by other things. So here's something that's Martin Gehring discovered back in the late 2000s, right? Is basically what he said is, he says, well, okay, maybe we can do some more complicated version. So think about that this is a function that just computes the division rule in a little bit of a different non-trivial way. So to give you an idea, if you can't parse that expression, we have some terms f1, f2, and f3 over here. So the idea is f2 is we don't split it in half, but we give you a little less than half. And once again, f3, we don't split it in thirds, but we give you a little less than thirds. Okay? And what Gehring showed is that the price of anarchy of this rule is actually hits back to our 1 minus 1 over e, our 63%. Okay? And in fact, what Gehring demonstrated was the following, is that this is in some sense the optimal rule. Okay? Meaning that there are no division rules for this problem domain that can guarantee us anything better than 63%. This is it. This is a hard constraint, and he characterized this. And this result came back in 2009. Okay? And so, mind you, the story's not done here. Why? Because when we talked about efficiency, we talked about two measures. We talked about price of anarchy. We also talked about price of stability. So this answers the question with regard to price of anarchy. Does it also answer the question with regard to price of stability? So let's kind of go through. We can go through these three different design choices and say, well, what is the underlying price of stability? So here, Shapley value gives us a price of stability of 1/2. Okay? What about marginal contribution? Marginal contribution actually does something better. It gives us a price of stability of 1. What does that mean? It means that regardless of the parameters that Marden chooses, if we use marginal contribution, I can always ensure that the optimal allocation is a Nash equilibrium. Right? The fact that these things are unique says there could be other bad one, but the optimal one will always be a Nash. What about Gehring's rule? Well, something very interesting about Gehring's rule happens. It says, well, the price of stability here is now also 63%. Okay? Remember, closer to 1 is better. So it means that, right, what is this? Is why his rule might have optimized the price of anarchy. We now are paying a price with regard to the price of stability. Right? Which now starts to bring in the following question as well. Marginal contribution seems to do very well for the price of stability. Gehring does very well for the price of anarchy. Is there a fundamental trade-off? Is there a fundamental trade-off? All right. So here's what we'd like to do is, so here's a plot of potential price of anarchy, price of stability pairs. So this thing isn't drawn to scale, just because I wanted to highlight the region of interest. So this bottom triangle just results from the fact that price of anarchy needs to be above price of stability. So we can't live in the bottom triangle, right? But we'd like to know where we live in this world, right? Meaning, where can we define division rules to get us performance guarantees in line with it? So that the idea is what we'd like to do is we'd like to have a price of anarchy and a price of stability of 1. Meaning we would like to push everything to the upper right triangle. We can start asking, is that possible or is that not possible? Okay, so here's our 63%, and so we can think about the best centralized algorithm. We talked about guarantees 63%. We can think about that as guaranteeing a price of anarchy of 1 minus 1 over e, or 0.63, and in some sense guarantee a price of stability of 1, meaning that if we stumble upon the best solution with a centralized algorithm, we'll stick there. So let's put the other conclusions that we had. Marginal contribution lives up in the far left, right? Meaning that we can guarantee a price of stability of 1, but our price of anarchy is 0.5. Okay? Shapley value lived in this bottom left corner, meaning that it guaranteed 0.5 and 0.5. Okay? And Gehring lived kind of right at where this dotted line intersects this black curve, meaning that we get 63% for both. Okay? So the question that we would like to ask is, what else is possible? Here are 3 designs. We've plotted here the performance associated with the 3 designs. We would like to know, where else can we define division rules or design division rules? What other performance guarantees can they have? Meaning that, could we get something that matches the performance of the best centralized algorithm? Yes or no? All right? And so it turns out that the answer is this right here. So the red region is in some sense not attainable at all. Right? There are no division rules that will give us performance guarantees that are in the red region of this. Right? Alternatively speaking, if you want to guarantee a price of anarchy of 63%, a natural consequence of that is a price of stability of 63%. right? If I want to improve upon the price of stability, I need to give up a little bit with regard to the price of anarchy, and this curve highlights that trade-off. Okay, it highlights that trade-off, right? Mainly is that we introduce two measures of characterizing the efficiency of equilibrium. They're in tension with one another, right? Guarantees when one come at the expense of the other and vice versa, right? So this is kind of what this plot tells us, right? We'll start wrapping up here, but once again, all of a sudden is when we talk about information, we talk about performance guarantees, it's not always immediate as what's happening. So once again, if we are allowing a centralized architecture, we can guarantee something with performance guarantees similar to a price of stability of 1, a price of anarchy of 1 minus 1 over E. If we're requiring a distributed architecture where agents rely purely on local information, we're stuck at those type of performance guarantees. Okay, 1 minus 1 over E across the board. So what does that mean? If we want to get improved performance guarantees of that, the only way that we can do that is by changing the architecture, or alternatively by giving agents access to additional pieces of information, right? In this type of work, what do is we show that in some sense is we provide that, hey, there is minimal degrees of information sharing that can bump us all the way up to there. Okay, with that, I'll say one more slide and then I'll cover. We can also consider extensions to this, right? And I'll just highlight a little bit what those extensions are. It says, well, if we want to move beyond set covering objectives to alternative objectives, which are separable and anonymous, meaning that each resource generates some form of benefit that's a function of how many agents are there, in a fairly recent work is we're able to demonstrate that one can actually extend this everything to that setting as well. And what do? We provide an approach for characterizing, in some sense, the price of anarchy, and we also have some form of a systematic approach for how to optimize the price of anarchy in this more general problem formulation. Okay, so with that, I'll conclude is we started off with this objective of what did we want to do. We wanted to design admissible control algorithms that attain near optimal behavior in a reasonable period of time. And our objective really was to try and tease out how information how it complicates this picture and how we need to think about information in the context of multi-agent systems. So the first part of the talk was really we thought about information from the choice sets or the choice of other agents where we didn't think about state information. In part 2, we really started to concentrate a little bit more on spatially aware systems and what we can do and can't do in that realm. And with that, I'll just put up some of my own publications and also some other relevant papers in the area. And I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'm open to any questions.
Do folks have questions? If not, I have a question.
All right, question away.
So that plot that you had, is that empirical?
No, it's
analytic?
It's analytic, and we can, and we actually have, we can characterize the division rules that sit on that curve.
Okay,
so it's tight.
What's the kink?
What's what?
The kink.
The kink is caused by you get different properties driving inefficiencies as you move along. So what you could think about is there's some form of worst case examples that are the driving factor of inefficiency. And at that point is when the worst case examples transition from one to another. Yeah?
So the function along that boundary is linear in that first part and then like
it's not linear anywhere.
Oh, it isn't?
No. It's just some expression, and once again it's tight in the standpoint that we can define some form of a division rule that'll meet that boundary. So you can't improve upon that, and it's not whether or not, so we know that the boundary there is attainable. Whether or not these points down here are attainable, we don't know. Just because that's...
Is it like a polynomial or logarithmic?
It takes some form of polynomial expression. Yeah. And once again, there's just that kink there kind of that emerges due to the fact that these worst... Yeah. Yeah.
So outside of Pacman, what are some sorts of applications of this optimized algorithm?
So I mean, there's so think about UAVs patrolling some form of an ongoing fire or something like that. Okay, so what do you care about as a system operator is you care about the quality, you care about getting as much information collectively as possible. And that's from you, that's in some sense getting the information from your UAVs, right? So they go out, fly, then they come back and they return and give you all. And then you look at that information collectively, and that tells you how much information do you have about your system, right? And so now when you think about dispersing those UAVs out in the world, right, you can't think about a central computer kind of controlling everyone by themselves, right? Controlling everyone at all instants of time and having full information. Rather, you're trying to instill on them some form of protocol for where should they survey, given the information that they have hand and their knowledge about what other people are doing, right? So the question is, how do you define that? And you don't want to just set them out there with, hey, before they go, you follow this path, because what you want it to do is, if they see something interesting, you want them to adjust. If one of your drones or UAV goes down, you want them to adjust to compensate for that. So you really need them to give the ability for how to react on the fly to what's going on. You want to give them some degree of intelligence, but they're all making decisions with limited knowledge of the world around them and what the other UAVs are doing or planning to do. We don't have unlimited communication to talk. So the question is, if your UAVs and you design their decision-making protocols, how they're going to choose their path, right? You're also designing what they're saying to one another. And if they can't say everything, what should they say, right? And that's kind of, we're not at the stage where we can start answering those questions yet for problems of that complexity, but these are inching us in that direction, in more of a tractable mathematical framework to start thinking about these.
Yeah, if there's no other questions, then we'll just thank the speaker one more time.